Hi there. I trust you did well in the last test, and just remember that you can review these sessions as many times as you want to get the most out of each of the session's content. So, continuing our studies with the 2-5-1 progression, I'd now like to show you some examples of creating bass lines using intervals to follow the harmonic structure of this chord progression. And also in the process, I'm going to get you reading and understanding musical notation. To begin with, let's recall a 2-5-1 progression in the key of G major. So for the first examples, the chord sequence will look like this. Now, one of the strongest ways to spell out the sound of any chord sequence, and something I suggest you try whenever possible in your playing, is creating bass lines using the roots and thirds of a chord. So, as our first chord in the sequence is an A minor 7th, we'd simply use a minor third interval here like this. The 5 chord, which is a D dominant 7th, has a major third, so quite simply just recall the shape on the fingerboard. And finally, similar to the D 7th, our tonic chord of G major 7th also has a major third played using the same shape like this. Okay, before we play this idea along with the accompaniment, let's have a look at what we're going to play written down in musical notation. As you can see, this is a vamp made up of 4 bars of music. These symbols at the start and at the end of the exercise are open and closed repeat marks, and simply mean that when we get to the end of the 4 bars, we go back to the open repeat mark and play the 4 bars again. So basically, we're playing 8 bars in total. The top line, or stave as it's known in music, contains standard notation for a bass guitar. And we know this because it's marked with this symbol here, which means bass clef. Now, it's important to note that this bass clef stave contains both lines and spaces. And as you can see, the notes move vertically up and down to occupy these lines or spaces on the stave, dependent on their pitch. If you'd like to refresh your knowledge of notes in the bass clef, then I strongly suggest having a look at our separate music theory lessons whenever it suits you. Now, most of you will probably be much more familiar with and recognise the lower stave. It's a shorthand way of writing down and reading music called tablature, or tab for short. You'll notice that unlike the bass stave above, there are 4 lines, one for each of the open strings on the bass shown here. Instead of notes, numbers are written on the lines to tell you which fret to play, so you can easily see things laid out before you attempt to play them. Looking at the first note, for example, we can see that it's played on the E string at fret 5, which is the note of A. Looking directly above the tab, you can see that this note of A is written on the bass stave like this, occupying the space between the first 2 lines. Also, you'll notice this sharp symbol here in the second bar. This symbol tells us to play this note and any other note occupying the same place on the stave during the same bar as a sharp note. In this case, the note of F sharp, which hopefully you recognise as the major third of a D7 chord. The chords of this sequence, which you'll recognise as belonging to a 2-5-1 in G major, are written in above the bass clef stave and show us where the harmony is changing, in this example on the first beat of every bar. So, let's try reading this and playing along with the accompaniment. Don't forget the repeat marks and make sure your crotchets or quarter notes are played accurately and on every beat of the bar. After 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. One of the main reasons why I like to use thirds, whether major or minor, is that they really spell out the harmony of the chord. I mean, after all, when you strip chords back to their bare bones, they're either major or minor, so this technique is always a good starting point in creating any bass line.